morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our webinar today. Hello, my name is Paul Branch, and I'm the Chief Networking Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting, and it's my pleasure to be your host for the session today. Today, we're looking at the interplay between business and our legal communities. We're just going to spend a few minutes sharing with you the results of some fascinating research that we have recently completed with our partner in crime here, Factor Law. So my colleague Lauren and I will spend just a few minutes sharing the results of that research. And then we're going to hand over to Ed Son from Factor. And Ed will moderate a discussion with our august body, our panel of experts in the field, to see if their experiences amplify the research, or perhaps find different experiences with it. So let's just take a quick look at our agenda, if we could. As usual, you've joined this call, the webinar today, with your lines muted. We absolutely want to hear from you, though, so please use that Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll ask the questions as we go so that you can get immediate feedback from our panelists. We'll hold the questions, though, for the first piece when Lauren's sharing with some of the data, and then we'll open up the questions when we go into our panel session. The slides, you're going to get a copy of these slides and a link to the recording, and also an infographic which will explain the findings, and you'll get all of that collateral in an email from World CC after the completion of this webinar today. So very quickly, looking at the findings, we're going to quickly look at demographics, look at the current state, some of these cultural dissensions between the business and legal teams, looking at where perhaps there's some similarity in technological innovation and process changes, and then finally look at our contract outsourcing shared priorities. I'll then hand over to Ed, as I say, and for our panel discussion. So there you go. Without further ado, then over to you, Lauren. Let's look at the demographics of this survey.
Thanks, Paul. So just to get us started really fast here, our general distribution for the survey was about 64% business respondents and 36% legal. So a little bit uneven, but still fair game for our analysis. Our regional distribution was heavier in North America and Europe, and other regions, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, etc., represented about under 11% each. And for our industry demographics, we saw the highest representation in technology, legal services, and business services, perhaps unsurprising given our topic. And lastly, for company size, we have a majority of respondents at companies with over $1 billion in revenue, with other categories under 20% each. So to dig in a little bit more, our first question we used to establish the current state, and it was this culture question. In your opinion, to what extent does the culture of the legal team align with the culture of the business? To which only 22% of total respondents answered almost always. It's worth noting that an average of 46% of respondents answered usually, but this still indicates there's some level of misalignment between our two groups here. And we had an open response that followed up that initial culture question. If the respondents answered anything other than almost always on the previous question, they were directed to, could you tell us why there is misalignment? Legal's answers were a lot to do with business folks compromising increased risk for business priorities, and businesses' responses were kind of the opposite. Saying that legal was too risk adverse and not willing to move at the pace of business. Again, this speaks to the differing priorities within the organization between the two teams. And then we have this transition question that kind of runs the gamut between present and future state. So this is drawn from a question in the survey that asked our respondents to individually rank their priorities for both present and future on a scale of 1 to 5. And from this, we know that legal is focused on speeding up the contracting process today, but that's not necessarily a super high priority for our business folks. Business is focusing on prioritizing risk mitigation, and legal also ranked this highly, but just not as their top priority. But both groups, when asked which priorities they valued most in the future, ranked speeding up the contract process highly. So at least they can agree on that. And starting with future state, we have this question about openness to automation. So when our respondents were asked how open their teams were to automating the contracting process, an average of 59% of both groups were open to it. And that, when divided up, 32 and 35% are open to it but have not taken any steps. And 26 and 25% respectively have already started the process. And our final point, when our respondents were asked what kind of approaches they were using or would use in the future for high volume, low complexity contracting, 71% of business and 70% of legal stated that they would be using outsourcing, in contrast to 29% and 39%, or 29 and 30% now, respectively. Other data from this question also points to our respondent population being very interested in contract automation, using clause library, CLM migration, AI-assisted contract review, and other workflow tools that streamline the process for both legal and business. And now we have a poll for you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Some things that we expected to see there, and I think some things we didn't. So it'd be really interesting to see from our panel their views. But before we do that, guys, what we'd like to do is we'd like to hear from you, our audience. So based on your experience, to what extent does the culture of the legal team align with the culture of the business? One of the questions that we asked of our in our original survey, and we're interested to see if views have changed or if there's similarities with our audience today. So I see the results are still coming in, and again we'll do a quick readout at the end. So this will be coming over to you, Ed, in just a second. So Navisha, if perhaps we could close the poll now and share the results. Interesting. 43% say usually there is alignment. 10% in the usually not, and good to see though, just 1% in the almost never. I think we've got some work to do though. You know, almost always would be the pinnacle, or perhaps not. Maybe we shouldn't see the culture in total alignment. Again, something maybe we'll discuss in just a second. Okay, Ed, any thoughts on the results that you see in front of you, or should we head straight into our panel discussion?
No, I think my only thought is I think that actually matches up somewhat to the poll results, which is almost always was not frequently mentioned. Usually and occasionally, you know, getting kind of the bulk, but a little bit of a skewed, something less than a normal distribution towards occasionally or usually, totally. which is interesting. Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely.
On the wider survey. So thanks, team. Thanks for your input on that. Do keep the questions coming. Use that Q&A tab as we're going into our panel discussion now. Let me know the questions, and I'll be moderating them for Ed to then share them with the panel. So Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I'm really pleased to have the panel here to discuss these results a little bit. I will just make a couple comments also about the data before introducing our panelists. One was that there was just an incredibly there's an incredible amount of detail in the data, and there were many more questions that were asked. There were more insights in there. We focused on 3 topics and 3 insights that kind of captured thematic findings from that data. You know, we really wanted to ensure that we weren't putting data out there that would or focused on data that could be subject to like a lot of different interpretation or didn't have clear differentiation. But there was just a wealth of other insights, and I think we'll find different mediums to share that with the community at large, because I think like the 3 topics here are, I think, poignant for discussion. They were certainly not the entire subject of the study, which was a tremendous amount of work. And my many thanks go to World CC and Paul and his team, as well as to Lauren Henderson at Factor, and Ashley and others that were slogging through a very high response rate survey across the industry. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel today. Lucy Basley, the founder and principal at InnoLaw Group, who is just an absolute thought leader and well-respected voice with a wealth of direct experience, as well as a lot of experience working with others on contracting. Will Morris, who's the chief counsel of civil aerospace at Rolls-Royce, and comes to us to bring that perspective from his experience at one of the world's leading companies. Tim Cummins, who many of us will know, is the founder and president of World TC, and whose insights I've always found. I hope to someday know what Tim has forgotten about contracting in the world and the world of commercial and contracting management. And then myself, I oversee taking a different role at Factor, overseeing our delivery capabilities and really ensuring that we've got the right capabilities and skills in our contracting professionals at Factor. So of course, a very interesting topic for me, and I plan on doing a lot of learning here today. So if we want to kind of take each one of those topics in turn, and I'll serve up some questions for our panel to discuss. So, let's start with that moment of cultural dissension. I think that that's a really interesting one. Only 22% feel that there is almost always alignment between legal and the business. I think here in this population, it was something like closer to 10 or 11%. So actually possibly even, more skewed outside of almost always having, alignment. Maybe I'll serve this up first to Will, being in-house right now. I'm just curious, at almost every major event that I've attended with general counsel present, I hear repeatedly, time and time again, that it is the role of legal to align with the business and to enable the business and to really not be the department of no that calls out risk, and instead to align and enable the business. So what gives here? Like, what is with this? I mean, I've heard that, spoken on stages for 20 years now, I think. And so I'm just curious, what is the, what are your thoughts on this, that the perception kind of persists that there's not really strong alignment between legal and business?
Well, hi Ed, hi everyone. Great to speak to you today. I mean, I think it's a great question, isn't it? And I've been in the same panels and talked to the same subjects as you say. I'm speaking candidly, my background, I'm a lawyer, but I work very much in a multidisciplinary team, and I'm in-house, so I always say business first, lawyer second. So it is slightly disappointing, isn't it, that we get to 22% below still after all of the good conversations we've had over many years in terms of how lawyers can become more commercial and business people more collaborative with legal departments. I guess my reflection from looking at the survey, whilst it was disappointing, some elements of it weren't that surprising. I think if we talk about culture, clearly we want alignment around purpose and goals and behaviors and values in a company. And certainly we try and do that a lot at Rolls-Royce. Where I think there is obviously divergence, and sometimes I think that can be a constructive thing, is in priorities. What is each team doing and aiming for when it's entering into the contracting process? And I think some of that constructive conflict can create good outcomes for the business. I mean, the lawyers are always described sometimes as a check and balance in some of the ways they work with the business. Equally, I think people who are more aligned to the business can obviously be better at value creation and understanding the financial drivers behind a contracting process. So for me, I think I'm a bit of an optimist. I think actually some difference is positive. It's how organizations, I think, use this difference constructively. But getting back to culture, we shouldn't really be misaligned around what we're here for and our purpose and behaviors.
No, I think that's great. Lucy, you are always consulting with companies and have just a leading reputation in contracting specifically, and different than, for instance, like litigation, which is my background, where you can have a bit of a division of labor, right? The business doesn't have to think that hard about litigation in terms of its oversight. That's why you have a legal department, you know, regulatory and compliance, privacy. Some of these things are quasi-legal business functions, but they have a division of labor. Contracting is where business and legal have to collide. It must happen, right? And so in your sort of work with all of your clients and with, you know, and from your observation and from your experience, you know, what is the result of something like this? First of all, do you observe this? Do you observe this kind of alignment or misalignment, you know, in terms of legal and business? And then how does that play out when it comes to getting a deal across the line and being able to transact as a business and getting contracts, you know, in place?
Sure. No, it's a really kind of a deep and thick question, because when I first thought about it, and I thought about culture alignment, the word culture can mean a lot of things and has becoming an increasingly more important factor in conversations, in people's, you know, jobs, mobility, everything that's happening in the last couple of years. Obviously, the last 2 years, everything that's happening today in the world. Seeing that technology companies are one of the highest respondents here, culture, I think, plays quite a different role, frankly, in technology and maybe younger companies. And Will, please feel free to jump in and disagree. But having come from actually a tech company that's now considered an older tech company, watching that migration and the importance of culture was really interesting. And the new companies, I think culture is kind of the top of the list. Somewhere in there, culture then influences risk tolerance. And to me, there's a difference between the two. Tolerating risks is a more narrow and specific subset of culture. I think cultural alignment, I am seeing at a higher rate than these numbers, the 22% and then the 40-something% in the poll today. Certainly in the younger companies, the tech companies, I do see really, really strong alignment on culture. Culture meaning, again, the values of humans, how they interact, how they collaborate internally as a team, as a company, how they work with their customers and their suppliers. And that's a cultural thing that I do see a lot of alignment. At least the talk is there, I have to say. So that number did surprise me. It disappointed me a little bit. But now if I'm going to go to the subset of culture, which kind of manifests itself in the risk tolerance, and suddenly culture's like, yes, it's good, we're collaborating, it's great. Oh, did you want me to take that risk? Suddenly the misalignment pops up. So this number doesn't surprise me at all if I think about risk tolerance as a type of misalignment. To get to your specific question, Ed, I think on how am I seeing it manifest itself today in deals getting done, in contracts getting done. It is the one showstopper, I would say, in every deal progressing. It is the one showstopper in that roles and responsibilities alignment, in that division of responsibilities. First question I ask in working with corporate law departments is, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are you spending time on the right kind of deals? And the answer, regardless of what it is, immediately shines a light on risk tolerance, whether it is substantive risk, legal risk, whether it's substantive business risks, or whether it's operational risks. That roles and responsibilities alignment, division of responsibilities, comes down to actually operational risks that some law departments refuse to take, meaning, we're going to handle all the contracts. I don't trust anybody to handle contracts outside of the legal department, right? The legal risks are obviously something that legal swoops in, owns, drives, and controls. And then there's that gray, what is a business risk really? And I'm the first to say contracts are a business document. Yes, they're a legal document too, but it's the deal that is being papered. There is an inherent underlying business purpose to the words that are being put on the paper. So I do see this as a showstopper, as a blocker, as an immediate kind of halt to the progress in a negotiation. Is this, let's call it a cultural difference, but I do think it's really that risk tolerance, and it's a tough one to negotiate internally. I see.
Yeah, no, and those are all great points. I think that that cultural difference, and Will, you were saying, even where are those differences? Maybe they're by design, right? How different should they be and whatnot? I mean, there's a good question in the chat, which is like, how do you actually negotiate that disagreement, right? And how do you actually bridge those gaps? Because it's kind of like, who should have final authority, which is would be great to just issue that by fiat right now for all organizations, that this is who has the ultimate authority. Tim, I'll turn to you, because you've been leading World CC for many years, and both in this community, cultivating and really aligning a lot of what it means to enable the world to transact better through commercial and contract management. And also, I think having seen and understood a lot of the specific people in the community and in their organizations and what it is, their roles that they play. And I feel like the roles and responsibilities question is part of what kind of is at the heart of these things, right? If there's a difference of culture, how much of that is by design of the role, right? Is the actual that lawyers are, you know, they deal in risk and that is their job. And if they weren't there, then the business would not do that necessarily well on their own when it comes to especially legal risks as opposed to business risk, et cetera. And so there's part of it that's part and parcel to the function. So I guess the question is, what does good look like? How do you bridge that gap? You know, how do you create competencies where, you know, lawyers are able to facilitate the business whilst still preserving their kind of accountability and duty to risk? How do you persuade business people to understand that sometimes legal risk becomes a real should be rightly a barrier to doing business? Where does that gap bridging happen, Tim?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Ed and Factor Law, for introducing, I think, these sets of questions and the opportunity to have what is an important discussion. Nationalities have culture, professions have culture, modern organizations are multicultural by nature. So I think we shouldn't get too obsessed by cultural variation. In fact, cultural variation is a good thing. It is through cultural variation that we often come up with new, different, creative ideas. We need to have an environment of challenge. Otherwise, we would lead extremely boring and unimaginative lives. So, you know, I think the fundamental point here is to recognize that every business, every organization is built on a contention system. And the question is how, and to your point, what does good look like? What we have to aim for, of course, is a creative contention system, not a destructive contention system. And I think constructive contention systems are usually hallmarked by behaviors. And we probably should be focusing more, in a sense, on behavior here than culture. And I think that goes to the heart of the points that Will particularly was making around that sense of purpose. But having said that, different functional groups also have some divergence in their sense of purpose. And, you know, what I think the legal group really needs to be thoughtful about is its role in asset protection versus its role in opportunity creation, realization, and enablement. But equally, what the business has to be conscious of is its balance and role between opportunity pursuit and value destruction. So that's where the tension in all of this process arises. Now, measurements are incredibly important here, and that often goes back, of course, to the board and to the executive team in respect of really making sure that those measurement systems are driving positive contention. And I think very often they are not. So, you know, I don't tend to blame the business or legal here. I think we are all of us facing a world which has got so much greater volatility, uncertainty, that we need to constantly be reviewing how do we in fact measure and define good, and how do we then flow that out into the various business groups to create that environment of positivity. Quickly, we do know from other pieces of research that lawyers by nature are optimistic people. So that's great news. Unfortunately, they tend to leave their optimism at the office door. And in fact, in the work environment, our research shows that lawyers in a workplace tend to be preventist in their behavior. So they are often more focused on trying to prevent bad things from happening than they are enabling good things to happen. So that's an example, but do we want them to stop doing that? I'm not sure we do. I think we come back to the question of, are the balances of power correct? Do we actually have the environment in which conversations occur, in which there is, and this is where speed comes into it, which I know we're going to talk about a bit more later, but do we have the internal governance models that generate the right discussions at the right time with the right people? My final comment will be, my experience, and I'm not a lawyer, I teach budding lawyers nowadays at the university. It's fascinating to see how they are being mistaught for the world of business, but that's a different subject. But, my experience is that all too often, lawyers are left to get into the process way too late because of that sort of perception of preventism and risk aversion. People sort of say, oh, well, let's leave them till the last minute. Maybe if they haven't really got much time, they'll say yes, or we can somehow push stuff through. And that is a massive mistake. We need to engage the legal function early. We need to make them feel part of the overall process, where they have the opportunity to join creativity and to make the risk comments that need to be made and taken into account. And I think through early timely engagement, we create much more of a team framework where we have the opportunity for far, far better outcomes.
Yep. No, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. There are some quick time checks because I think we could talk about this forever and we've got more interesting data to go into. But I think maybe I could ask the panel for a rapid fire response to one question that was submitted, which is, do we think that legal, the way the question was sort of worded was, is there any similar data for other support functions like finance, HR, or IT? And so do we think legal is unusual in this way in terms of a corporate function that supports the business, the quote unquote business, which I'm assuming is kind of like the commercial sell side or buy side? Is there any similar data for other support functions? And so maybe a rapid fire 1 sentence or 2 sentence, view on that. Do you think that legal is unusual compared to the cultural difference of finance and the business, the cultural difference between HR and the business, the cultural difference between IT and the business? How do we kind of rate relative to other corporate functions?
I'll jump in. No, the business complains about all those support functions and they're never fast enough. I don't think we're different. Legal is just really easy to pick at because we're special, because we're regulated and we like to halt things based on our regulatory position. The others don't have that power. That's the only real difference.
No, I agree with Lucy. I think that's spot on. In fact, I travelled with a finance director last week, and he pretty much said the same thing. We shared similar experiences. Actually, there's a really good space for collaboration between different functions and what they see here, and it comes back to what Tim says about engagement. And to pick 2 quick things up based on the previous discussion, I think the ultimate arbiter to your question, Ed, of where does the risk alignment sit is actually the board. And the way we can solve how we get the right balance is, as Tim described, good governance. And for me, it's as simple as that. How do we get these teams working together in a framework of good governance so that we can align with what the board wants by way of risk alignment?
And from my point of view, my background is finance. So I think I can safely say that I think finance is even worse than legal when it comes to risk aversion. I think they are often highly conservative. We certainly see that in the funding community, for example, where they actually impose classical legal theory even more than lawyers do. And another community that I guess I feel qualified to comment on is that of contract management, which actually, unfortunately, very often in looking for a home, they become even more lawyers than lawyers are. And the contract management community can be so incredibly conservative in its attitudes and views.
Let's move into that. What a great segue. That's just an alley-oop for dunk. The next section is really about where there are some similarities and where there are some differences in the priorities between, business contract managers and legal contract managers. And so, some of the priorities for legal were really focused on speed. Lawyers seem to say that the most important priority in the present day current state is faster contracting, whereas for those in the business community who are responsible for contract management, they view business risk. And we phrased the responses very specifically, not just generalized risk, but business risk, right? So, because I see some comments in the chat, really good comments around like, it's all about risk management. Couldn't agree more. It'd be great to just say like, here is the dollar amount at risk, the business value at stake when we get our fallback position on governing law, or when we have net payment terms of this, or when we have indemnification that says that equals 6% of the contract value or whatever, potentially at risk expected value. That'd be wonderful. But, understanding that risk management is kind of an overall governing principle, really focused on business risk. And that was ranked as the top priority among business professionals. What is the, why would legal respondents to this survey be so focused on speed? It's interesting to think about that. It seems a little out of character in a profession that's very focused on attention to detail, identifying risk and liability, breach and litigation avoidance, but what is therefore in a survey like this, what's driving this need for speed? Will, let's start with you.
Well, we've been talking about efficiency for a long time in contracting, haven't we? And I just think legal teams get it, as in they need to be as much as possible meeting the challenges and priorities of the business, and that includes efficiency and speed. What I found really interesting about the survey is you had the business contracting teams focus much more on risk. And that's where I would be today. If you had asked me the question 2 or 3 years ago, it was much more about efficiency and speed of contracting. Now, to me, with everything going on in the world and the way things are so volatile and changeable, it really is about risk. So I think that was a really interesting difference. In reality, of course, speed is connected with being agile and adaptable, and making sure we can respond as quickly as possible. So I think there's an alignment piece there, but I still think lawyers think efficiency is the key priority. I'm personally not sure it is at the moment.
Interesting. Tim or Lucy, anything to weigh in? Lucy, you're on mute.
Just testing everybody. We had to have one of those during the webinar. I think really it's just been beaten into us as in-house counsel for so long. Speed, just you're too slow, you're too slow, you're too slow. That just is such an easy, common place to go in terms of the highest, priority. Is it's just been beaten into legal, I think, for so long. It's the top complaint. It's the easiest complaint to make, right? Any complaint about risk tolerance requires, with all due respect, some intelligent conversation. It requires some positioning, some thought. It's super easy to just point and go, they're too slow. And that's it. That's just enough to raise all the fire alarm. So I'm not surprised that this is the top priority. Yeah.
Tim, any other thoughts? Anything to weigh in there?
I think Adam sums it up in his comment that, legal teams...
Hearing it every day.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was interrupting you.
Legal teams have been beaten up for so long with the fact that they slow everything down, etc., etc. I'm not surprised. It's a big sensitivity. But of course, speed is very much a component also of risk management. If it's delay to revenue or delay to bring a product to market or whatever, that is not good news for the business. Speed of response to today's uncertain conditions as well, So speed has to be up there. I'm also really fascinated when people talk risk management, what do they really mean? What is the span of what they perceive as risk? And what do they mean when they talk management as opposed to risk allocation, as opposed to risk mitigation, as opposed to risk avoidance? We tend to have this very interchangeable terminology. And so what did people think when they were actually selecting risk management?
Totally. No, that it means so many things to different people. Risk does, require that thought, as Lucy just said in the chat. One other thing I'll just throw in there from the factor perspective, one of the reasons why speed does seem to be the order of the day still, and why there's that perception, is what we've seen with our clients is increasing contracting volumes. We just see that. And so it's not necessarily the time to turnaround of a contract once it arrives on someone's desk, creating more efficiency, more rigorous process, more knowledge artifacts that can be applied repeatably. It's more about the fact that there's a long queue of contracts to get picked up. And so there's not necessarily a sense that lawyers are, like taking a nap, eating a sandwich, sitting on their hands. It's more like contracts are happening fast. There's too many. And so speed is actually sometimes, slowness is sometimes actually volume in disguise. So that'll be interesting to see, in terms of, and then like our legal contracting professionals as well resourced as contract management professionals that sit in the business. One of the things that we see there is where we see a procurement contracting function, seeing it staffed with 10, 20, 30, 40 people. Whereas for a legal department, oftentimes of 8 or 9 people, managing all the risks across the company, and then also facilitating contracts, they're not necessarily resourced similarly, and so, and those are broad generalities. Of course, there are legal departments with lots of contracting firepower. Of course, there are contract management groups with very small, they're short on resources too. But I, as a generality, we've observed some of those trends as well. The other kind of piece on kind of the state of contracting in transition was around adoption of innovation and automation and technology. And we see some movement from both, but some of them have made a little bit more progress in the current state than they have in the future state. You kind of have your adoption curves like slightly phased so that business is a little bit ahead in terms of their innovation and adoption of automation, whereas legal is not far behind, nor do they deprioritize it, but in terms of is in planning or is currently in place, like just slightly lagging behind. What's and any thoughts or general viewpoints in terms of automation and innovation? And while there's a lot of alignment there from across business contracting and legal contracting, what's your sense on the perception and the differences, from those two groups on those lines and in terms of the current maturity and their plans? Lucy, maybe we can start with you. I know you work with tons of clients on getting that, across the last mile and actually effectuating it and getting from fancy plans to real ROI. What's your take?
I couldn't help myself. I had to chime in on the chat. I'm like, and here we go, because tech, I'm like 5 points for whoever mentions AI. AI, 5 points. It's a frenzy right now. It is a frenzy state of the industry right now and CLM to me is not the tech. CLM is the entire thing, which nobody remembers because we all think CLM equals tech because of that frenzy. So I'm a little disappointed in some of the players in this space, right? There's just so much bedazzling happening and a lack of substantive content. I'll just say that right now. A real lack of interest in driving real value and all to jumping to sell the tech. On the buyer side, the excitability is palatable. The promises that are put out there is of course contagious. You can't help it. You want it, right? So the buyers inside of corporate law departments have an excitability, but they're trying to balance it with all the other stuff they have going on. So if there's a tool that's going to solve this contracting problem, they're gonna jump at it probably faster, frankly, than I think the contract professionals. So that is where I think there is a bit of a difference. I see the contracting professionals being a little bit more methodical. They're more familiar with maybe some of the best practices in technology selection. They're more connected to other parts of the enterprise or the corporation. They come from other backgrounds, perhaps. So they're bringing in a little bit, again, more of that. I'm just gonna say business savviness or business experience that some of the lawyers who come in-house, they just don't have it. It's not a ding, it's a reality they don't have. So they're going to jump at solutions a little bit quicker. Doesn't mean they're more successful. So that's a different question, right?
Interesting.
The speed to technologies I'm seeing absolutely doesn't, by no means is speed equivalent to success. In fact, it's the opposite. There's a complete right now, misalignment in the rush to CLM technology, and with the success that we see it after it's implemented. So I am seeing the contract management professionals appreciating the need for, I call it CLM readiness. Nobody else calls it that because nobody wants to admit that it has to happen before you bring in technology, but really spending more time on the content, the templates, the playbooks, the risk thoughts, the analysis, all of that. Whereas legal, who's actually super well versed in templates and playbooks and in risk thought analysis, isn't realizing the importance of it as quickly. And I think it's just sophistication of buyers of something that is a new type of technology, right? It's hard, right? When you go in to buy something that you're just not quite familiar with. So yeah, it's a bit of a frenzy right now. I think it's going to look different 2 to 3 years from now, but right now we're hitting it at like this most sensitive point where it's hard to figure out what is real out there in terms of technology.
Yep. No, I completely agree. There's a lot of dust yet to settle, I think, on contracting technology. Will, I'm curious to get your thoughts because Lucy has stated some kind of generalized qualities, and understanding the generalizations around many of the backgrounds of business professionals versus the backgrounds of lawyers. It's a topic I've studied in great depth, over my career, having been a product manager, focused on lawyer tools. And the cracking this nut of adoption, and it's great to see great interest on both sides. It's interesting to see that business is a little bit ahead. It's interesting also Lucy's comment that those kind of factors that are conducive to more adoption do not necessarily guarantee success either. What's your view? You work with a bunch of lawyers, and as well as in a multidisciplinary team, so you kind of get some view on both. What's your kind of take and perspective on technology success and on how they prioritize that, and even kind of like the emotional support or goodwill or interest, curiosity around automation and innovation? Is that well placed? Is there something there? Is that almost like a psychological defense mechanism? Like what's going on there, and what are the differences you see between lawyers and other professionals?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can speak on this topic because maybe I've seen more failure than success over the years. I carry the scars of failed CLM projects, and us trying to, we call it Rolls-Royceify an off-the-shelf system, which never ends well. So,
but that sounds so nice. It sounds so fancy.
Sounds great, doesn't it? But yeah. So I mean, my take would be it's really working quite well at the moment, where we have a very multidisciplinary technology project, which is servicing the business aims and legal, commercial. My team is very much integrated as part of that integrated project team. That's as good as we've been for many years, and we're making real progress. And the light bulb moment, I think, went on in the organization where we did a better job of describing, with the finance team, frankly, the value in contract data and doing this well, and actually the loss and the issues that we were causing to ourselves by not doing it well. So I think setting out that, if you like, value proposition early, then understanding what the business is going to want to be doing with its own enterprise systems, and then working out how you can plug into that and get what you require, what you think is valuable from the same sort of projects, is working really well. And so I'm feeling positive about the whole space at the moment. I think people are excited by it because it's an enabler. It enables them to, and we'll come on to outsourcing maybe, but it enables them to focus on other things that they think are even more valuable. And I also think it helps to be a catalyst for change in the organization. So, people underestimate the change you have to go through culturally, organizationally, in order to effectively deploy technology in this space. And so it's a catalyst for change, and that's quite exciting for many. I mean, one of our best developments was we actually set up a digital commercial team, and everyone went, "Oh my God, what's that?" And these were commercial professionals who understood technology projects, who could work with, data analysts, enterprise architects, some of these job titles I've never heard before, but they were able to work with them, and it's made a massive difference. So yeah, I mean, I could talk a long time about the things we've learned from it, but I think it's really about integrating yourself within a business project, and being really good at collaboration.
You know, if I could have staffed this panel differently, I would have had starker differences of opinions. But one of the lessons I've learned here is that between Will, Lucy, and Tim and myself, actually, you know, the context that's important is proximity to kind of a multidisciplinary approach. And I think, Will, it sounds like, if I had to be so bold as to say this, a lot of the success that you're talking about and some of these other job descriptions that are now your colleagues, that some of your success is actually due to that. That you could credit the fact that you've got a diverse team of professionals with different skill sets working alongside each other and aligned for success together. You know, if I wanted a more kind of feisty debate, I would have gotten like the most oldest school lawyer ever and like the most, you know, forward thinking, let's ditch legal and make it a robot business professional ever, and then just had at it. But I think there's a lesson to be learned here. I want to move us to our last topic, which is around the future of contracting and whether it will be in the business or outside of the business. And this was something that, you know, is one of my favorite topics, obviously, given my day job. But over 70% of both business and legal believed that contracting would be happening outside the organization. And it's important to note the valence of this question. This was not business and legal people saying that they wanted it to be outside the organization. It's that they believe that that's what's going to happen in the future, right? And so I don't want to assign, you know, agency and desire to forecast and prediction necessarily. But nevertheless, there's something here, right? This idea that when you close your eyes and you visualize the future of contracting at your organization, it's happening somewhere outside your organization. So, you know, after all this discussion around contracting, priorities, cultural alignment, technology, adoption, it's like both sides agree that contracting should eventually go somewhere else. So what drives that? What would be your hypothesis? Speculate wildly on why you think people are responding with that vision of a future for contracting. I open this
And
up.
I've spoken to business leaders who have said to me, you know, we can outsource everything except for contract management. You know, if I'm going to outsource extensive stuff, do I really want an external body self-managing its own contract? Probably not. So there are clearly limits here. My interpretation of this would be there's a tremendous amount of the activity in our current benchmark reports showing where time is spent. And there is a tremendous amount of time spent on contract management that, yeah, some of it could be outsourced. To be honest, I think a lot of it can and will be automated. I think, you know, we are going to be much more imaginative with the technology we deploy, thinking about this much more as a platform that can really operate across other enterprise systems and, importantly, between enterprises. So there's tremendous simplification potential. And from simplification, yes, for sure, you certainly could increase the level of outsourcing. The evidence for it so far, again, you may have been reading all of our industry benchmark studies, the evidence of extensive outsourcing of contract-related activity is still pretty limited at the moment. But, and again, will probably only increase with the availability of better technology to oversee and to create discipline. The other big attraction of outsourcing is that what we're talking about here, I think, is transactional outsourcing. And what we really need to retain is the knowledge and intelligence that comes from the data associated with our contracts. I'm a tremendous fan of what Rolls-Royce have been doing. It's actually one of Will's team that sort of got me to truly appreciate that actually talking about contract lifecycle management is rubbish. It's actually all about contract data management. And we need to think about the entire flow of data across the organization. Our benchmark study tells us, and we talk about outsourcing, our benchmark study tells us that on average, 26% of the workforce is involved in some way in contract management. It permeates everything, everywhere. And that is something that we've, I think, signally failed to really understand and enable. So as we look at this structure in the future, yes, there's phenomenal opportunity. Outsourcing will have a role in it. Technology will have a role in it. But we also need to fundamentally reimagine the value of good contract management.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. Is when we say here the future of contracting, where I went immediately is that contracting transactional work, contract review, negotiation, close, not contract management, not post-execution obligation management. So I do think that's a big distinction. I don't see that second part being outsourced. I see the first part being, well, I was outsourcing before it was cool. I mean, we started doing this when I was at Microsoft in 2008. Everybody thought I was insane. What do you mean you're handing off transactional? God knows who, what's gonna happen? They can't do a good job. You're crazy. I heard it all. 20,000 contracts a year later, and I think they're celebrating their 10+ year anniversary at this point at my alma mater. And, you know, it's still probably one of the leading, biggest kind of outsourced engagements. It takes two to tango. So yes, it's a good prediction. It only works if both sides get it. The amount of time that we spent teaching, training, and we have to teach the risk because it doesn't change the risk. I do agree with that point. It will not. It does change speed. If it doesn't change your speed or efficiencies, you've outsourced poorly. To my in-house friends and to service providers, if you're not increasing the speed and velocity, you're doing a bad job. Sorry, Ed, but I think that's the key here, right? That's why you hand this stuff off. The prediction, it makes sense because people are pushing out lower complexity, higher volume work. They absolutely have to. In-house can't just keep hiring more lawyers, God forbid, or more expensive, you know, commercial contracting experts. They're all those are expensive resources. Bringing in more does not create efficiency. It definitely doesn't create speed. It actually doesn't create consistency because in-house we're worse at that than outsourcing. Outsource gives you consistency and it gives you speed. Risk is risk. The in-house team has to dictate that and be very crisp on that. So outsourcing is an art form. Not everybody's good at it. And then to get to this, to get to this real vision, that's going to take a lot of those related and ancillary, not ancillary, related professionals, Will, that you mentioned. 100% only reason I had any bit of success is because of amazing program and project managers who supported me and helped me make outsourcing work. And outsourcing, by the way, isn't only going to be going to alternative providers. Law firms eventually might figure it out. We tried that too. We did it when I was in-house. We did it. Still one of the few ones, unfortunately, because they're having a tough time figuring it out. But it takes two to tango. You gotta both be there. And sometimes you frankly need an intermediary. That's a lot of what we end up doing. We end up helping mediate what outsourcing can look like so that it is actually successful. You can't lob stuff over the fence, right? It's like technology. Lots of promises and then that. So sorry, lots of thoughts on this. There's a lot that goes in here. Successful outsourcing is extremely collaborative. It is transparent. It is honest. It is in alignment of goals and vision. It is both having skin in the game. This is not a bringing in a plumber to do your plumbing in your house. So right. It'll be interesting to see if we actually get here. I love the vision. I worry about the realities, but
yeah. Will, what are your thoughts? And I would kind of also reiterate a question around like, almost like the psychology of the response, right? Like, so a lot of people see this in the future. Is it because they're like, oh, get it off my plate. I just don't want to do it. Like it sounds, if there's a mythical party out there that could just do this for us, wonderful. Or is it more, like a reticence, like, oh, finance, IT, HR, that's all this outsourcing, I guess, legal, contract, transactional elements of contracting might be coming next. And then even just your take and your view, like, how would you have answered this question? Where do you think, the future of contracting is? I'd love to get your thought.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, go on. It's a bit like the increased use of tech, isn't it? I think we're outsourcing today is happening. Companies are doing it well. Is that set to continue? Yeah, good outsourcing will. I think to Lucy and Tim's point, it's the execution element, high volume, low complexity. More and more of that is going to, I suspect, people look to third parties. I mean, I try and put my CEO hat on, Ed, which is quite hard. But and how I would have answered it, I suspect would have been not being as interested in contract management as this panel would have been. Yeah, of course I can see it, more of it being done by third parties. Ultimately, I want us to be the best at designing and servicing aero engines, and if someone else can do contracting in a better way that's quicker and more effective, then of course we should use them, and that's the best leverage you can get in an outsourcing arrangement. So I think that probably would be the mindset. But of course, and Tim made the point, as soon as you talk about contract management and its overlap with relationship management, customer supplier intimacy, then it becomes a bit more difficult. Oh, actually, that's not contract management. That's intrinsic to our competitive advantage and how we work with people. So we don't want to outsource that. So I think yeah, transactional high volume will be outsourced. There will still be focused on, hang on, what do we need to retain control of to be intelligent buyer of services and intelligent customer, and supplier to our own customers. I think that'll still be a question. The bit that I think is interesting, which I think again has worked quite well with us, has been where you combine access to technology with outsourced provision. Because actually some of the great outsourced providers, of course, pull a lot of technology investment from all their other customers, and you can get access to that in a way that's not about building your own systems on premise. And so thinking about that and using that as best practice and sharing with others, I think that's been a good place for us. You've got to do it carefully, but a combination of outsourcing and technology is probably a sweet spot.
That is tremendous. I think there is a lot of nuance in there. And I got to say, thank you for everyone that's having a lively discussion in chat. I feel like I could have just ditched the panel and talked to you all in chat, because it's such interesting comments going back and forth. And I'll make one comment there, I think, just about the chat and about this community and many of the attendees. We are all fellow travelers. And so for many of you who are like outsourcing, I'm not sure, like the requirements and, finding non-legal contract professionals, like this is like, the thing is, this is a community of people who are the ones that know how to do this well, that have invested, that have would show up to a panel like this, that would take the time to be educated, that have a lot of success in a lot of your initiatives, just like Will, just like Lucy, like you have. And so it's important to understand that you are a little bit of like the coalition of the willing here. That, and I'm not sure that all the survey respondents are necessarily. Many were from within the community, but many were from outside and from others. And so I think that if you can, develop, and I even see some of the comments where it's like, thank God I have a great team, so I don't need to think about outsourcing it, because like I do have a wonderful procurement team. That's fantastic. I think that that's absolutely the principles that are being advanced. And then, when it comes to that integration into the business, contract management, into relationship management, and the whole bag, the whole 9 yards, absolutely, that is the lifeblood of the business. And obligations management is actually just the relationship between trading parties. But I think that the idea that there is something that, is an itch that people have to scratch. The one anecdote I'll give real quick is we had a client come in, and his basic comment was, I didn't know contracting was its own thing. I didn't know there were a bunch of people who all they did was contracting all the time. I guess that makes sense. I just didn't realize that was a thing. Process, technology, adoption, training, certificate, I didn't realize that there was an entire industry called contracting. Now that I know that, like, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go engage that community. And that's the difference, where this community, you are those people, and we are all those people. So an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. We'll follow up with more, collateral and more data. Would love to engage with you. And on behalf of the panel, we thank you all for your attendance to the panel. I thank you for a lively discussion. And we're really excited to see where the future goes and how we'll continue to bridge gaps and achieve a future for contracting across business and legal together. Thank you all so much.